At the moment, the most popular exhibits at the museum are the mouse and fairy houses. They are magical and fun, and people feel they can make them with found objects from their yard or a hike in the woods. They require very inexpensive materials and are fun to do as a family project. It's a great way to get kids outdoors and discovering nature. We're going to look at some of the houses we have on exhibit at the museum, and later there'll be a demonstration on how to make fairy houses. Now, this is a 4-story fairy house. It's done with birch bark, and the inside walls are all painted, and pressed flowers become the designs on the wall like wallpaper. And you can see the little fairies that are living here, and all the furniture is made out of twigs. I'm going to show you in a few minutes how to actually make one of these houses. The interesting thing is this is a little bed here, and you can see it's done rather fancily with netting on it and some roses for the bedspread. There's goldenrod has been used around the kitchen. You have a little door. So they're fun to do and easy to do, and this is made with materials, as you're going to see in a few minutes, that all of you have around your house, or you can go out into the woods to find, and finding a lot of interesting seed pods, whether they're milkweed pods like this is, or sea holly pods are kind of fun, and some dried flowers. It's kind of fun to take a look at some of the different furniture in the houses, and all of it, as you notice, is different because the twigs are different. The materials you work with are different. This happens to be sweet fern along the walls here. And as we mentioned, in the kitchen we have goldenrod. And we have a cute little cabinet in the back with some dishes on it that's also outlined in twigs. The bases or floor of the house are designed this way. It's going to be an 8-inch piece going across here, 6 3/4 in height. And of course you can do any size you want. This is just the size I arbitrarily picked out. You could do 10 inches by 8 inches if you wanted a larger house. That's up to you. And then once I get those two measurements, I'm going to fold this in half and just cut with my scissors a nice arch connecting the two. Once I get this basic pattern, I'm going to lay it out on foam core. You can cut wood if you'd like for wooden floors in your house, or the foam core is nice because you don't need a saw to do that with. And I'm going to take and trace, and in this case I've already traced 4 bases here. I'm just going to go right around this little paper pattern, just trace it. And I fit 4 on here. Now what I'm going to do is cut it with an X-Acto knife. This is the best way to cut this foam core. And you may have to go over it a couple times to go through the foam core to actually get it to cut. And you got to really press down. Now I've taken and protected the table with a layer of newspaper so I don't cut through and damage the table. But I'm going to take and really press down hard on the knife as you go. And just pull it right around. And sometimes it doesn't cut all the way through. We'll know in a minute whether it has. And let's see, they're going to come out. This one's come out. If it doesn't cut all the way through, you may have to go back and just press again and cut it. Interestingly, the houses are actually made with poster board. It's very flexible. And I've gotten this package of poster boards from Walmart. It's 8 sheets, and they're 14 inches by 24, which is almost what I need, so it's an easy thing to handle. You can, of course, just get one large piece and cut it down. What we need is we need a piece that's about 20 inches wide. Now, I've left the whole 24 inches because I'll cut it off at the end. And we're going to make a mark on the paper up to 6 inches. That's where the middle floor will go. And the height of this is going to be 12 inches high. So you're working with basically a piece of poster board that's going to be 12 inches high by 20 inches wide. Now what I need to do is get some pieces of wood that are about 1/4 of an inch wide and 12 inches tall. And what we're going to do with that is put one right at the edge of where we're working. That becomes one of the supporting beams, and the other one will go with the other side. You'll need 3 floors to put together the house, the top, the middle, and the bottom. So I'm going to take these little 1/4 inch pieces that I mentioned that we're going to need, and I'm going to glue it onto the edge of the paper. And this becomes one of my supporting beams. Now, this is a material that you can find at Home Depot if you don't have saws to cut it yourself. They do have strips of wood like this. It's, again, not very thick. It's about 3/8 of an inch by 3/8 of an inch. And they have it in the trim section of the lumber section in the store. The other thing I like to do when I start working is have some masking tape. What it does, it becomes your extra fingers to hold things in place. And because we're going around in a circle here, it's not going to want to go that way without being fastened into position. And I find it's easier if I just take and rip off some tape and just attach it just temporarily on the edge of the table so I can grab it when I need it, when I start gluing these things together. And the glue that I use, again, is our tacky glue. It's a really easy glue to work with, and it does start holding in place fairly quickly, so it's a good glue to work with. But any white glue or carpenter's glue will also work. I'm going to take and put a bead of this glue right along the edge here. And I've only put on one side of the structure, this one over here. I'll put the other side on once we've got all the floors in place. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start rolling this around the curve here. And as I mentioned, you probably will need some masking tape to hold it in place as you go. And I'm just going to grab it from the table there and put it on here. And I'm going to keep rolling along. Again, it doesn't really want to stay in place, so you're going to have to just, you may have to go back and adjust a few things after you're done. And we're going to come to the end here. Again, as I say, I'm not going to put that other piece of wood along this side until I get all 3 floors on, and then I'll know exactly where it goes. And I'm going to put one over on this side here. Now, the reason we drew this line in the middle is that's exactly where this next floor is going to go. And you can either put the glue on the floor itself or on the cardboard, whichever you find is easier. I'm going to put it right along that line. And again, since I'm going to cut off that edge, I'm not going to go all the way to the edge. And then I'm going to take another one of these floors and stick it in here. Again, following right along that line. And I'll kind of hold it in place here. And then I'm ready to put the top floor on. Again, I'm going to go around the edge, put the glue. And I'm going to slide in the last of the 4 pieces. Go back around here. Stick this in. And again. What we're going to do is take another one of these pieces and line it up here, and then I'll just take an X-Acto knife and cut it off after everything is dry. But let me just take and put the glue down here, because I don't want to do anything until this glue is really set. The other key ingredient to creating these little stump houses is birch bark. This is white birch bark, and I've gotten them in some pretty big pieces so that hopefully it'll go around and I won't need to use to patch it up very much. Now what I've done is I've taken the birch bark and I have washed it with bleach so that there'll be no insects in it. And also the birch bark outside may have some mold on it, and you want to kill that mold before you start. You need quite a bit of it, so when you go out to collect it, try to get it all at once and clean it all at once. We finished putting together the shells of the house. In some cases we still have little pieces of paper along the edge which we're going to cut away. And we had tape, masking tape, that we used to hold things in place while the glue dried. And now I'm going to cut them off. I'm not going to rip the tape all the way off, because what it'll do is it'll pull away at the poster board, and we don't want that to happen. Also on the bottom I'm going to leave the tape totally alone. It just can stay there and be part of the actual support. But at the top, because we're going to decorate and paint the top here, we want to get rid of it. So I'm just going to pull it up and very carefully pull it up so I don't rip the foam core, and I'm just going to cut it off. Now the last thing I have to do to really give this some support is to tape just a little stick of wood right across the back here. And again, I'm going to do that with our tacky glue to be kind of circular in shape. And what I've done to make sure some of these pieces are circular in shape is I take and I dampen them and put them in a tin. This is actually an old sap bucket, so that they take this oval kind of shape. So when I glue them on, they're really almost in shape of the piece itself. And to get that to happen, just wet the bark. Sometimes it wants to go in the opposite direction, and you can't do that. And some of the pieces are fairly firm, so wet them and stick them in a bucket that kind of has the shape of your house, and let them dry. I find the best way to approach putting the bark on the house is to get a nice piece of bark, put it on. I'd like as many big pieces to work with as I can. And what I'm going to do is, after I put it on, and this almost, because again it was shaped like that, fits on beautifully. And then I'm going to take a pencil, because I'm going to lift it off for a minute. I'm going to go around where it is, so that I know this is going to cover up. And so I've got a big piece to work with here. So after I've outlined where this big piece is going to go, I'm going to start filling in with small pieces. I have kind of a nice one here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over a little bit over the front here. We'll trim this off afterwards, as you'll see as we progress along. But I'm going to take and glue this in place. And what I tend to do is I tend to start gluing. So I'm going to glue right along the edge here first. And I'm going to lay the piece in place. Again, the hot glue dries fairly fast, and be very careful. Sometimes there are pores through here, so to press it down, I press it down with something other than my fingers. If you get this hot glue on your fingers, it really can burn you. And then once I start it, then I can lift the piece up and I can just slide hot glue underneath it. And I'm going to go farther than this piece is going to go underneath the other piece that we tested out there. And that's okay. You end up getting a bit of a layer as you progress. Now what I'm going to do is go around and I'm going to fill in all the places that I drew out there, so I know that's where I need to put pieces before I lay the major piece. Now I have one here that's all set up. This has been, and you can see how it happens. I've got pieces, you know, I had to fill in along here, pieces I had to fill along in there, and this piece should take and fill in most of the rest here. Again, I want to leave some interesting little things along the front here. Let's see how this is going. I want it this way. This is the way it goes. Okay. And you can see I've lined up underneath there, so we're all set. And this may hang over the bottom a little bit, but that's okay. We're going to trim. We can trim that off afterwards. So again, I'm going to start by coming to the edge here and putting a lot of glue down. I can't glue the whole piece. The hot glue, one of its charms is it dries very, very quickly, and that helps us with this process. But the other bad thing about it is you have to do what you're going to do right away, otherwise it hardens on you. And I've got to hold this in place, and again, as I mentioned, kind of, you know, use something else. Don't get your fingers near the hot glue, because up here, this is very, very hot. I'll just take my scissor and push it underneath there. And then once I start the process, I'll hold it for a minute or so to make sure it has glued down. Now this one, we're just about done putting all of the bark on it. Now this is just the initial stage. I have to go back and do a little bit of working along the front here, and you want to get pieces that are curled or kind of interesting. And there may be some pieces here that I don't like the coloration of. I'm going to go back and add other pieces to it, but I'll do that when I get to the final tweaking stage. And another way to make sure that I get pieces that are nice and rounded is just, again, dampen them, roll them up, and put a rubber band around them. For example, I may decide that this piece will look better here than what I've got, but I'm going to get them all covered up first, and then I'll go back and refine them after it's all done. The other thing we're going to be doing is we're going to take and we're going to put beams, stakes right along the front here that will finish off the edges and actually give it some more support. And we can glue these in place, and that works, but what I also like to do is I also like to take a piece of fine wire and put it through a needle and actually take and run it through the cardboard and take and actually wire it in place. We can put, as I finish gluing off all the pieces along the front here, it'll eventually get hot glued in place as well. And we want it to be nice and flat and flush against the front. You might have to cut off some of the knobs, but what you want to do is you want to go out and look for some really nice, straight but interesting pieces. Straight and interesting. And then as you'll see later on, we're going to get some fine pieces and we'll run them along the individual floors as well. Now the next thing we're going to be doing here is we're going to take and we're going to wallpaper the inside. Put our wallpaper on some pieces of poster board, and eventually it's going to go along on the inside, but I have to paint the floors up first. I'm going to paint the ceiling white, and I'm going to paint the floors a blue color. This is the blue shade that I've got, and I'll just take a little bit of the paint and put it on. And again, it's better to do it in 2 coats rather than one heavy, heavy coat. If you do one heavy, heavy coat, what will happen is you'll warp your foam core. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take and just do a light coat along, and I'm going to go up along the edges there a little bit, so if the wallpaper doesn't quite match, you're not going to realize it because the wall's also been painted. So we want to paint the floors, and in this case I'm picking up a nice shade of blue to match And I think I'll do both of these floors in blue, and I'm going to paint the ceilings white. And again, as I said, try to just do it in light coats first, and then go back afterwards and give it a second coat, and that should be enough. And the top, interestingly enough, what I'm going to do there is I'm going to take and use a creamy color, and I'm going to take and paint it in a way that it looks like it's cut from the tree. So we'll work on that at some point. So again, you're going to take and paint all your floors. Again, I'm going to match the wallpaper and paint the ceilings. And after you do that, we will wallpaper them. I still like to use the tacky glue on them. And when I glue them, I'm going to take and work on a surface that has got a cover of plastic on it. And I'm just going to take the glue and put a thin coat of it on the paper. I don't want to put a very heavy coat on it because the paper will buckle on you. And I'm going to completely cover it, and then I'll flip it over and attach it to the plain white poster board. Stage where I'm going to put the wallpaper in. Again, these were pieces that we wallpapered. They weren't fit at all to the houses themselves, but that's what we're going to do now. This one I've cut into shape, and it fits in quite nicely. And again, you want to get it in and see what it looks like. I've got a little bar along here, so I'm going to set it in place there. I'm going to work it around the edges, and it comes back to the side here, and I will mark that, and I'll cut it into place. Now, to get to this stage, you've got your wallpaper like this, and what you want to do is cut it down gradually. I've got it probably right about there. And again, I don't want to cut too much or too little, so I'm going to take and sort of shave it gradually. I'm going to take off about 1/4 of an inch here, and I may have to do this a couple of times to get it to fit in, but I'd rather take off little bits at a time rather than have it totally out of kilter. And I'm going to just take and see if it fits in. Close, but not quite. And I'm going to make sure that, okay, this sort of fits back there. Again, seeing how it's going to work. Okay. It looks like just at the beginning here, I've got a piece that needs to be shaved off a little bit. But again, just shave it, do things gradually in there. Okay, looks like we're all right here. Now, I'm not going to glue this in right now. I will cut it to make it sure it fits right there. I'll just put this right off. And let me see where I made the mark here, right here. Okay, right around there. And the nice thing about using a wallpaper with a pattern is you can kind of use that as a guide. And I'm going to take and cut this off. Now, I'm not going to glue it in right now, but to glue it in, I'm simply going to use, again, the tacky glue. I'm going to smear it all across the back. Again, I might dilute it a little bit with water and paint it on with a paintbrush. And then I'll slip it in. We're now at the stage where we're going to do some fine-tuning to these houses. What we've done is we've put some pieces of twigs along the edges here to give it some structure. Now we're going to go and we're going to put pieces of wood right along the little twigs right along the front to finish off the floors. We're going to take and glue some pieces of wood along the top frame here. And I've got some pieces here. I'm going to cut them with the bigger clippers. And I'm going to save a lot of these little knobs. They look kind of interesting along the top. And when I do this, I'm going to pre-cut pieces so I sort of know what I'm doing. I may double some of them up later, but we're going to start gluing these in place. On the houses, when you're doing it, you're getting big pieces of birch to put along it. And sometimes they don't line up, or sometimes there's an empty space. Right here I have an empty space up here, and I've got kind of a funny little section here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take and glue another piece right on top of it to kind of fill things in. Again, be careful when you're working with a hot glue that you don't burn your fingers, because it is easy to do. I'm going to stick that in with a stick. And I'm going to even off some of the colorations, fill in with where there was a gap there. And I'll go back and put glue right where I need it. And press the piece in place. Now when I come along to the front, I want to make sure that this is sort of camouflage. As you can see, I've got some areas here that I need to put some little pieces in. And I did save a whole bunch of little pieces like this that I can break off. And again, I try to break them rather than cut them if it's at all possible. And then we can go back in and just stick these little pieces in place like that. And it covers things up and fills things in. Now on this side, I have a section here where you can see that this is open. I'm going to take the wires that were here too, and I'm going to pull them back so that again they get camouflaged. And I have kind of an interesting piece here that what I'm going to do is glue this in place. Again, it'll help finish off the front here, and it will, I'm going to take off the bottom here. It'll finish off the front, and it'll camouflage in here, and it'll finish off the edges a little bit. And then, as we mentioned, we're going to be taking and putting twigs or little sticks along all of the floor lines. I've done a bigger one for the base here. I'm going to glue that in. And I've done narrower ones for the top, these two floors here. Now, a lot of times I keep the little knobs here. They just look kind of interesting when you lay them out. Again, they're natural pieces of stuff you're working with. But before you glue anything or even start doing anything, make sure all the pieces are the way you want them and they're fit in place. That they'll fit in place, they're trimmed to what you need before you start adding the glue. Because the hot glue dries very, very quickly. So you want to make sure this is all going to work.